It has to happen through an auditory manner, through a visual manner, through games, through the activities we do in as many ways as we can. Okay. So here is the data which goes on to support what Ananta said a few minutes ago, that we do have a mental health crisis going on right now, and I will come to it in a little more in a minute to tell you why this is so serious in adolescents particularly. Needless to say, these numbers are enough to make any of us sit up and worry about why this is happening. Okay. And what we will try and do is to try and make a case for where education can try and impact this. Okay. But somewhere, anxiety, depression, feeling left out, lack of perspective is beginning to impact the brain, which is the center of learning. Another survey that was conducted about a year and a half ago showed that children are less empathic than what they used to be. There's an increasing sense of unhappiness and a tendency to ignore emotionally satisfying behaviors. Okay? That's the second point that we are worrying about. Why is it that youngsters and people around us in general show less empathy? Okay. And the third, which has really made a mark of a difference in how we can approach it, is the data that comes in from the understanding of the brain. Okay. So I think there is no doubt about the fact that as teachers you all recognize the fact that all learning happens in this, how many pound mass sitting between our ears? 1, 5, 10 pounds? Anybody? It's a 3-pound mass. Okay, so your brain is not more than just little over a kilo sitting inside, and that's doing all the learning. That's where all the stuff that you guys do in classrooms is impacting those brain pathways. So one of the first things as teachers I want you to recognize is you are probably the only group of people in the world who are playing God, if God does exist, because you are wiring the brain. Okay? The child is born with some level of connections, but your teaching is what's setting up those neural pathways. Okay? So you have a tremendous responsibility to make sure that we set up the right pathways, which make sure that our kids are empowered to do whatever they want to in life, to make the right decisions. Okay? So we therefore need to use this neuroscience evidence to make sure education is doing it right. Okay? So over the last 30 years, two important points of view that have emerged from the neuroanatomy and from the evidence is the fact that outside what you see, so that's the neocortex, okay? And we'll talk more about the brain as we go along, and that's really the thinking brain. And that's what a lot of education is focused on building this thinking brain. Okay? But there's an emotional brain sitting at the back, sitting right inside, which is actually it's like the strings of a puppet show, okay? Which is actually doing a lot of that pulling on what you focus on. That's the emotional brain. Okay? How excited you get about something, how much you begin to learn something, how much involved you feel about this learning is happening all because of that emotional brain. And we now have the evidence to show that. Given that we know that learning needs to be rewarding, okay, for any good learning to happen, that reward has to set in, that emotional reward has to set in. It's important that we bring in emotional learning into the picture. Okay. If I stand here and talk like this to you, I can assure you in the next 5 minutes you will go to sleep, right? But if I talk to you with some level of animation, if not anything, just your brain pathways of auditory processing will process the different levels of pitch that I get into, and you will begin to listen in and at least prevent yourself from falling asleep. Okay. So as teachers, we need to not just become teachers, we need to become actors too. As we play out for our children all the things that we want them to learn, so that their emotional roots get activated. And that's what we're going to try and convince you to, and hopefully empower you to. How can we bring in the excitement back into learning? How does the role of a story, of a narrative begin to be important when learning happens. How important it is for learning to be contextual. So now that we have these three aspects and recognizing the fact that human beings are actually social and emotional beings, so there is a social network in the brain and there's an emotional network of the brain. And we need to engage these with the information and the learning that we are doing so that learning becomes relevant. And therefore, education really needs to be set up to do whole brain learning. We need to be able to teach children how to be able to not just think for themselves, but how to use their emotions to be able to act well and to use that emotion to build into learning. So coming back therefore to a point which is somewhere a grandiose objective for us, and that is that education has to be for human well-being. Not just to get marks, not just to get into a specific college, and not to be able to say that this is how much money I earn. Okay. You want to make sure that you live in a society and be surrounded by people where there is happiness, there is equality, and everybody has a chance to be able to do that. Okay. That's somewhere a grandiose objective that education has in mind, and that's going to be also crucial if well-being and the SDGs are to be achieved. How many of you know what the SDGs are? So there's this maybe reluctant show of 3 or 4 hands, okay? 5 maybe, okay? So we want to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, okay? And given that we are in a workshop which is organized by UNESCO, I do think it would be valuable for all of you to go look up this colorful wheel to see what it embodies and what the 17 SDGs are. Okay. SDG 4 is on education, and as teachers, you must be aware what it encompasses. Okay. So those are the details of what SDG 4.7 seeks to achieve, and that an important component of that is global citizenship. Okay. And I'm sure all of you are wondering, what do you mean by global citizenship? And hopefully in the course of this workshop, and more importantly, as the program unfolds, you will begin to appreciate what global citizenship might be. Okay. So having set that stage, that social emotional learning is important from a learning brain development point of view and a well-being angle, let's try and see if we can structure it a little more firmly. And a broadly accepted description of social-emotional learning. And I've combined a couple of things to come up with what we want to try and achieve here is empower and make sure that children can understand, name and manage emotions. Okay? It would be great fun to know how many emotions many of you can name. And we will do some of these exercises as we go along the next few days. Okay? How do you make sure that you regulate your emotion when you are in the world? How do you just not react to things, but make sensible responses which are regulated? In order to achieve well-being, it's important for us to live and work together. To live in isolation is a thought that we have to put aside, because remember, human beings are social beings, okay? So the need for society is inbuilt in the brain already. Okay? The brain is already a social brain. One of the ways that you learn language is because you are in society. Okay? So you need to be able to make sure that children not only feel empathy for others, but also show empathy for others. But how do you make sure that in the process of showing that empathy, you don't get too carried away? You are still in a state of mind and a state of control. You are mindful of your own being to be able to take the right action, to be able to alleviate suffering and pain. Okay? So you want to have to make sure that children know how to take compassionate action and do it in a way so that they drive it towards a positive change. Okay? So a change of state or a change of situation which is for the better. This is largely termed in the SEL literature as pro-social behavior. How do you move away from apathy, as in terms of not caring, but drive towards positive change so that you are able to make a difference on what's around you. Okay. Finally, what guides all of this is the ability to engage in critical and rational inquiry. How do you talk to yourself? How do you look at enough data and documentation to make sure you're taking the right steps? Okay. So these are all grandiose objectives, and they will take some amount of work for us to build in and embed into our education systems. Okay. Given that we've done some level of serious talking, let's spend a quiet minute in introspection. Okay. So I want you to put your pens down. Just sit back, and you can close your eyes if you want to. You can keep them open. But I want you to try and see and focus on what are the different sounds you might be hearing in this room. Some of you might be getting a little hungry. If your stomach is rumbling, that's okay. Focus a little bit on the sounds, and then we'll come back to the rest of the presentation. I just want you to process what we've talked about so far. For those of you who are using this quick moment to check your WhatsApp, that's not allowed. Okay, somebody tell me what are the different sounds that you heard around you? Yes?
Sound of AC.
Sound of AC. Okay.
Few people talking at the back.
Okay. Sound of AC, few people talking at the back. Anything else?
And someone was walking down, so the noise was
Shoes. Okay.
spoon and plate.
Okay. I could hear my stomach rumbling. Anybody else?
In between the WhatsApp announcements.
So you're hearing in between our WhatsApp announcements too? That's good. So that means you were focusing on what I was saying and not listening to the sound around. Got you there.
That's part of the sound around us.
So good. The point I was trying to make is sometimes in classrooms, we forget in our excitement for covering in syllabi that children need time to process. Okay? So you might have talked about a concept, and sometimes they just need time to think about it. Sometimes a child is being distracted, and you need to bring him or her back from that distraction that he or she is experiencing, because it's sensory, you know. Your senses are telling you there's another sound happening outside, and bring him or her back into the classroom. Okay. So these little interventions, okay, help you establish that connect back into the classroom, help the child to come back into the classroom too. And over the years, I've come to realize adults need this just as much as children. So I think just human beings need time to come back into what they are doing, because it's so easy to get distracted and to let your mind wander. Okay? The wandering mind is a big challenge to deal with. Okay? So one of the other things that research has shown is that social-emotional skills predict adult outcomes very well. Okay? So kids who have high social-emotional skills graduate from school, often most of them end up obtaining a full-time job, go on to pursue their goals further on in life. Okay. Whereas children who have low social and emotional skills can get caught into drug abuse, can get into juvenile detention, can often get into arrests, so they're also a big reason for school dropout. All the more reason for us to make sure that children have these social emotional skills as they are growing up. And over the years, people have established through very rigorous research that when you have social-emotional learning in classrooms, not just children's behavior and pro-social behavior improves, but even their academic scores improve. So for those of you who are worrying about the achievement tests, even though Ananta says you shouldn't, but for those of you who still are, these are going to help kids focus even whilst they are doing those achievement tests. But more importantly, towards dialogue and global citizenship, it brings about flexibility and thought in behavior and in the way we interact with our surroundings. And as adults, we are clearly recognizing that this whole feeling of persistence, sticking with your goals, the ability to be able to stay focused is so important for getting on ahead in life, to be able to continue doing things that drive you, okay? So that you don't give up very easily, but have your own persistence to continue through that. So having done that and realizing that hopefully SEL, I feel you are now convinced about, should be brought into classrooms, let's talk about ways in how we might teach social-emotional learning. Okay? And the best way is by practicing it. Okay? So one is to become socially and emotionally resilient individuals yourself. But more importantly for somebody like me, and I'm a neuroscientist, it's because that's how the brain learns. The brain learns because of practice. Okay? Learning depends on a fabulous phenomenon called neuroplasticity. Okay? The ability of the brain to make new connections, and those are those new connections that are made in the brain, is because of practice, is because of a habit that you begin to build in. And that's why the emphasis on practicing social-emotional learning. You can know all of it, but if you don't practice it, it's not going to happen. And if it doesn't become a habit, it's not going to make its mark or make a difference in life. Okay. So that's why social-emotional learning needs to become a habit for all of us into classrooms. Okay. And to share with you something interesting about the word habit, which I learned as a young student. Okay. So why do we want to create good habits? Okay. So remove H, a bit remains. Remove A, bit remains. Remove B, it remains. Remove I, T still remains. So all good habits, even if they are after a point of time get weakened, have reasonably good entrenches into your mind, into your behavior, and therefore you can go back to them more easily. Okay. So remember, for learning to happen, the brain works like a muscle. Okay. And you need to train that muscle over and over again so that these new connections get made. There are a number of frameworks for social-emotional learning, and here is something that NGIP has developed. Okay. It's called EMC squared. So we are going back to good old man Einstein, and going back to him and realizing he started about talking about EMC squared in one way, but we realize it has much larger implications. Only here now, the E stands for empathy, the M for mindfulness, the C for compassion, and the second C for critical inquiry. We feel if you build in these 4 skills, and each of these competencies or skills is embedded in a specific neural circuit, which I will just show you, we'll go on to build learning for the whole brain. Remember, that's where we started out. We want to be able to build emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence. We want learning for the whole brain. But these 4 competencies can be like the bedrock on which all other learning happens. So that's the SEL framework. And so let me quickly take you just for 2 minutes away into a little bit about where the brain will come into this. Okay? And so here, in the spirit of collaboration, turn to the partner on your right or your left, whoever's available, And one of the things I want you to take away from is what part of your head represents what part of the lobes of your brain. Okay. So if I'm standing this way, this is the frontal lobe. And you might as well remember this. I'm going to do a quiz on this on the last day. Okay. So this is the frontal lobe. This does decision making, language,